Um, Thank you, Ali, very much for asking me. I'm standing in front of a lot of people who know a lot more about the horror of Sizewell C than I will ever know. So I'm not going to talk about Sizewell C specifically, but I'm just going to try to set a little bit of a national context. And you probably know all this as well, but I'll keep it short and hopefully sweet. Well, sharp and sweet. So we're standing in front of a massive monument. It's a monument to a lot of things. It's a monument to the incredible stupidity of the nuclear industry. It's a monument to the mendacity of successive governments. But it's also a monument to the tenacity and bravery of people who oppose and have opposed nuclear power for decades. Everybody here will know this, this old story, but you've been told, or we've been told, that this is, it's an inevitable part of the solution to to the challenges of climate change and energy security. We all know that what it really is a massive, in this case, literally massive distraction from the real solutions. It's a massive distraction from the things that we actually need to spend money on if we are going to get out of the incredible mess we're in. And I'm just thinking of a couple of things. I mean, obviously, it is a colossal. The words of scale seem to keep popping back up, don't they? It's a colossal waste of money, but it's also a colossal waste of time, because as another founder of environment movements, Amory Lovins, said probably 30 years ago, every dollar or pound that you spend on nuclear power could have been multiplied in its effectiveness 8, 10, 12 times on pretty much anything else. Originally energy efficiency, but also now renewable energy, and probably most importantly, and dare I say it, possibly controversially in this area, expanding our electricity grid to create a power system that actually is going to be suitable and for the future. I mean, if you look at the way that this project has been constructed, what it really has done is create the most incredible, through its funding structure, and again, I'm sure you all know about the wonders of the regulated asset base, that means that if it never generates a microwatt of electricity for decades on end, investors will get paid for it regardless of what happens, and it basically becomes a safe deposit box with interest for foreign investors. Anybody from the Norwegian National Wealth Fund to the Qatari government. It's not a good deal for anybody. Certainly not a good deal for people that vote with. I mean, worldwide, if you needed any evidence that these things are just fantastic boondoggles, you only have to look at Finland, France itself, Hinkley C, China, where these reactors just take decades and decades to build, and sometimes never ever generate any electricity at all. All they do is generate profits. Every pound that is going to be spent here could so much more meaningfully and profitably be spent on wind, solar, battery storage, anything that is going to give us a modern, flexible, sustainable energy system that actually is good for citizens, it's good for you as a customer. God help us, everything's transactional now. But the reality is, if you were a government that was really, really looking after the interests of its citizens, what they do right now is pull the plug on this. Millions have been spent, right? Millions have been spent. That's a crime and a waste. It would be a far greater waste to spend billions that it will take to build something that will solve absolutely none of the problems that every one of us faces here, whether it's affordability, whether it's a secure energy supply, whether it's battling climate change, which we seem to, at least in the last year or so, forgotten about. And I think the reality is that this is an opportunity for someone, God help us, our Prime Minister, to actually do the right thing, to actually redirect the resources to the place that they need to go. That would be good governance, that would be strong government, and that would be responsible behavior from people who'd like to be world leaders. And all I can say is, thanks for having me here. I'm really happy to be and proud to be part of this event, and I hope that it's yet again some sensible resistance and a sensible conversation about what happens next. Thank you very much, and thanks to everybody.
Regarding Sizewell C's secret sea detention. been built like a one-sided castle. Sea defences in the front, and anyone knows the area, basically got low-lying coast either side. So basically with sea level rise, there's a great risk of flooding, particularly with the impacts of climate change, with rising sea levels and increased storm surges. And basically the site needs to be kept safe until the late 2100s while there's still spent fuel stored on site. And during the DCO, we raised all these concerns, but they were sort of casually dismissed. So we were therefore very surprised to find in 2024, when the Office for Nuclear Regulation issued their nuclear site licence, in their documentation it included plans for two, what they called overland flood barriers, which basically are additional sea defences over and above what was in the DCO. And these are basically there to deal with extreme flooding in a climate change scenario. And following a freedom of information request, we were then outraged to find that EDF had actually been discussing proposals about these additional flood barriers since 2015. Yet, as I said, they weren't included in the DCO examination. There's very little detail in the documents about these structures, other than there's the southern barrier, which, if you imagine, would run from the corner of Sizewell A site through to the cliffs here. It's basically 10 metres above sea level, so basically you're looking about 20 foot of sea wall right across the whole Sizewell Gap. And the northern barrier basically would run for potentially up to a kilometre from the top of Sizewell C site inland across Goose Hill and into higher ground inside. And basically what we're saying is that the impact of these sea defences on the residents, the environment, it should be given public scrutiny and assessed now, not decades into the future, which is what Sizewell C Limited want to do, particularly when there are alternatives that need to be considered. Basically, we're already leaving a legacy for future generations to deal with climate change, and Sizewell C's 4,000 tonnes of spent nuclear fuel, which will be stored on site, as I said earlier, to the late 2100s. We should not also be burdening future generations with the financial and ecological consequences of these additional sea defences. We did approach the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero about these as far back as August last year when we first heard about them, but they've basically taken no action. So we were left with no alternative but to actually start our legal challenge against the Secretary of State's refusal to look into these sea defences. Obviously, legal challenges cost money, so we're just basically asking if people would be willing to support our crowdfunder. Basically, there's details on our website. These little cards here, they've got QR codes which will take people to our website, and we look forward to hoping that, or seeing people help donate to our cause. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Pete Wilkinson and I carried our pints to our favourite table at the Sifton White Horse, a pub that lies a short walk from our two homes, which at the time stood side by side, just a few miles from here. After cheers and the first sip, he asked, "Been away?" I was always travelling in those days, and I'd been interviewing the great sailor Ellen MacArthur in Cherbourg for the Times. "Yeah, Cherbourg," I said. Pete nodded. "Last time I was there, I got tear gassed." It was clear that our lives had been rather different. It was also clear from the moment we first met on the banks of the River Yox that we were at least on the same side. It's just that our approaches were rather different. Even then, I'd written millions of words about wildlife and the need to protect it. Pete had driven in between the Japanese whaling fleet and a school of whales. Perhaps the pen is not quite as mighty as a rigid-hulled inflatable boat. Certainly not when Pete Wilkinson is on board. Pete was a tireless warrior, and yet the cause he fought for was peace. He was by nature an underdog, one who saw no point at all in fighting unless the odds were at least 1,000,000 to 1 against. Just us few against the British government, just us few against all the great nations of the world. That was the sort of battle that Pete relished. Before the Battle of Agincourt, Henry V said, of his own side, God's will I pray you, not one man more. And that was Pete, proud to be one of the happy few that faced down the rulers of the universe. He had two great weapons. One was the emotional power of the underdog. The second was the irrefragable fact that he was always fighting on the right side. He knew it, and what's more, so did his opponents. What better image is there of the noble underdog than Pete in his inflatable, trying to stop ships dumping nuclear waste into the ocean? His plan was to stop the industrial nations deliberately poisoning the planet. Someone had to do it. The courage, the noble folly, the moral force of the righteous underdog. Pete represented an organisation with a few thousand quid, and he took on governments with all the money in the world and all the power that goes with it. Apart, that is, from the power that comes from being in the right. Pete consistently employed the right tactics against the right targets, unlike more recent protests from other organisations. Pete and Greenpeace attracted sympathy rather than alienating it, as gallant underdog against great bully. What's more, his clause was clearly and obviously right. Long before I met Pete, I managed to get pictures of his adventures into the pages of the Times, writing about a courageous task force of lilos trying to make the world a better place. When you find something monstrous, you have no option but to fight it, at least if you're that sort of person. And they are pretty rare. I remember reading much the same story, only without the lilos. This was the great Anglo-Saxon epic, at least if you're that sort of person. And they are pretty rare. I remember reading much the same story, only without the lilos. This was the great Anglo-Saxon epic, Beowulf. I wrestled with vast, thick clods of alliterating verse for a full year, did enough to get through the exam, and then abandoned the damn thing forever. Or so I thought. But there's a problem with great literature, no matter what language it's written in. It becomes part of you, whether you want it to or not. And the tale of the great hero Beowulf, his two amazing victories, his time of peace and his meeting with his last dragon. Well, I've never been able to shake it off. And it now seems clear to me that Pete had something of Beowulf about him. I knew him as a highly efficient drinker of pints and a teller of some of the worst jokes I have ever been seriously offered. But he was also a hero who demands to be celebrated in epic verse. And if I could write alliterating lines in Anglo-Saxon, I would serve him far better than I do with these poor words. Beowulf begins by fighting Grendel, a fearsome monster with the annoying habit of sneaking into the great hall and devouring warriors while they slept. Beowulf waits up for him and slays him with his bare hands. It's now illegal, internationally illegal, to dump nuclear waste into the sea. The outbreak of global common sense came about because Pete and Greenpeace simply wouldn't let go. Ships went out to sea to let loose something that would remain poisonous for millions of years. And there was Pete and his team of lilos, along with the cameras. Every battle was, of course, given the full sonnet lumiere. Beowulf's second task was to kill Grendel's still more fearsome mother. He did so with a giant sword, that he found in her lair at the bottom of the lake. In the 1980s, the Antarctic Treaty Nations declared Antarctica a world park. They agreed to hold off exploration for oil, gold and other minerals for 50 years to leave the place and its strange beauties to themselves. They did so because every unworthy action of governments in the Antarctic was recorded and publicised by Greenpeace, and Pete was the person who set this up and maintained it. Beowulf then became a king and ruled in peace and prosperity for many years. Pete moved to Suffolk with Gay and Emily, and Amy followed a little later. It was in many ways the perfect life, the first part full of every thrilling adventure that a boy could ever dream of, and the second part living in exactly the sort of love and peace he had always been fighting for. But Beowulf had his last dragon. He went into his last fight with a strange foreknowledge of defeat. But that didn't stop him fighting, not for a single second. He knew that victory is not the only thing that matters. What matters perhaps still more is fighting on the right side. The sight of the ruination already caused by Sizewell C all around us becomes slightly more bearable when I see it not as the triumph of the bastards or as the failure of those who campaigned against it, but as Pete's last dragon. Pete was in there fighting to the end, and what's more, what's absolutely everything, he was fighting on the right side. He always did.
As a child, I spent so many days climbing trees, walking the twisting paths of Coronation Wood, watching sunsets bounce off the branches of the oak trees and making my acquaintance with the local wildlife, listening to the birds and making sure they were aware that I was only a visitor to their home, that I found so beautiful and privileged to be able to walk through and experience. That very wood is now a pile of dead trees, dirt tracks and displaced animals, lost with no home to retreat to, surrounded by roaring trucks, flashing lights, and soon it will be covered by cement and rubble. No matter the environmental impact of nuclear waste and our government's decision to contain the waste for 100 plus years on site, leaving us as surrounding inhabitants more susceptible to cancer due to low-level radiation poisoning, the environmental impact on local wildlife should be enough to make the endeavour a cruel and useless decision and a waste of money. I feel I speak to the general population of Suffolk when I say, we did not decide to make our lives here, raise our children here, create our communities here because of its industrial job offers. Suffolk is not our energy coast, it is our heritage coast. My dad moved here in 1998, made breathless by the stunning wildlife that surrounded every inch of Suffolk, and to see it slowly change and become lost to a cause he spent his whole life fighting against was absolutely devastating. My dad has done endless work on fighting the nuclear industry, even working for the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, helping to advise nuclear waste disposal conferences, and travelling around the world to discuss the impacts of safe disposal and decommissioning. He looked at it from all angles and attempted to meet in the middle. It did not matter who you were or what side you were on, my dad would talk to you as just another human, worthy of a good conversation or a good debate. I am so proud of him for all his efforts. Even up to the day he died, he was sitting at his computer campaigning, never giving up. So now we are not giving up. It takes very little time to research the impact of nuclear energy, radioactive waste. I feel humans having this technology is similar to monkeys with machine guns. We do not yet understand the impact or the horrors of what radioactivity can cause, but we are aware of the implications. This is not a magical environmental answer to our coal industry and politics that politicians want you to think it is. It is dangerous and it is not a long-term solution but a long-term problem for our future generations. We as the public are being lied to about its safety. I even remember as a child in Leyston High School being taught how to hide and protect myself from a nuclear incident if Sizewell B was to have any fault. The thought terrified me as a child. I thought, why do I have to be scared for my life, my family's lives, over something I entirely and wholly do not want to exist? And now you are telling me that we need another one. And not even in the face of conversations with MPs or court cases or setbacks did my dad ever waver or back down. He is my biggest inspiration, and seeing the pain on his face as he drove past miles of empty land that was once the very fields and forests that made him fall in love with Suffolk was so painful. To know that he is gone and this monstrosity is still going ahead absolutely sickens me. He was outraged because he was so sensitive. My dad was a fantastic friend to the world, and he loved life relentlessly. He loved nature, and he raised his kids spotting frogs fall and learning the different bird songs, spotting seals in the sea, and watching starlings flock over Dunwich Heath. Sizewell C is not your land. It is our life and our past. Even if we cannot stop the destruction, let the passing of my dad, knowing how much he wanted it to not go ahead, move you. He will be laid to rest, planted as a tree in our village, on top of our hill that you loved so very much. It feels from that hill that you are completely alone, surrounded by nature. So bring your roundabouts, bring your highways, bring your lorry loads of concrete, but from where he will stay, I am thankful that he will never have to be disturbed by these horrors. Surrounded by the flowers he planted, the trees he loved next to the cottage he raised us in, he will be at peace, removed from all this devastation as he deserves. The papers he worked on, the evidence he collected for a correlation between childhood leukemia and low-level radiation, the work he has done on dumping radioactive waste on the steps of number 10 wearing a hazmat suit to prove that we do not want to be near it. If they do not want to be near it, then why should we? It's all out there, so research, research, research. The biggest enemy to stupid governmental decisions is an educated mind. My dad may have been a lorry driver from Deptford once upon a time, but he did not stop reading, understanding and learning. That is what made him such a fantastically respected campaigner, even amongst the people who disagreed with him. And even in his passing, we will continue his legacy. Sizewell C, not for me.
Hooray.